For, wow, 5,000 years, the Korean peninsula has been this incredibly dynamic region, a real meeting point, sometimes, well, often a battleground in East Asia.
Yeah, and look at it today. Divided. North and South Korea, it's such a unique, almost poignant example of national separation in modern times.
Right. They share such deep cultural roots, but the political systems are just fundamentally opposed, aren't they?
Completely. Democracy in the South, and then this hereditary one-party state up north under the Kim family.
And the Korean War, that conflict that just ripped the nation apart, it still feels like such a singular tragedy.
It absolutely is. And it's that whole long, often really turbulent story that we're going to get into today.
Okay, so we've got the materials you shared, and our mission here is basically to pull out the most fascinating bits, the key developments from Korea's incredibly rich past.
Exactly. We want to give you, the listener, a clear, engaging understanding of this history, but, without totally overwhelming you with every single detail.
Sounds good. Let's start with something pretty basic then. The name Korea itself. It's interesting, isn't it, that the Western spelling isn't always the same. You see K-O-R-E-A, sometimes C-O-R-E-A.
Yeah, and that actually reflects the different ways early Westerners, missionaries, diplomats, first encountered the peninsula, different routes, different spellings.
Huh. So even the name tells a story about how the West engaged or maybe didn't engage consistently early on?
It does. And tracing how that name evolved is pretty fascinating. So during the Goryeo Dynasty, that's roughly 10th to 14th centuries, the Chinese called it Gaeli.
Okay, Gaeli.
And as that name traveled west into Europe, it morphed. You get Kori in French, Korea in Spanish and Portuguese, even Kori in Dutch.
Wow. So Goryeo basically lent its name to the country as it became known internationally.
Pretty much, yeah.
Right, and then there's Joseon. That's the name from the Joseon Dynasty, late 14th century, right up to the early 20th.
And that gets transcribed different ways too, right? Like Chothon or Chosen.
Exactly. And today, well, in South Korea, you'll mostly hear Hanguk.
While North Korea tends to prefer Chosun.
But that term, the Korean peninsula, that seems to be the neutral ground everyone can kind of agree on. Reflects the geography, but also the current reality of division.
It does. Okay, so let's zoom way, way back to the very beginning. Human presence on the peninsula. We're talking the lower Paleolithic period, the old Stone Age, basically.
Okay, super old.
Yeah. And over thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, you see this slow development of primitive society. It really starts to take shape, though, in the Neolithic Age, the New Stone Age. That's around 10,000 years ago.
And from those really distant roots, we start seeing actual kingdoms emerge, right? During the Bronze Age, maybe around 2000 BC, and then the early Iron Age.
That's when you get names like Gojoseon up north. And down south, Baekje, Donggi, Mahan.
And even further north in Manchuria, ancient Korean tribes setting up city-states there too.
Yeah, absolutely. It shows this early capacity for organization, for cultural development, even with all the political shifts happening.
So these are kind of like the building blocks then, for what came later.
You could say that. By the 1st century AD, these smaller groups started to coalesce into bigger, more powerful kingdoms. Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla. Those are the big three. Plus Gaia down south.
Right, the Three Kingdoms period. And you mentioned a golden age from the 4th to 7th centuries. What made it golden?
Well, relative stability compared to before, maybe, but also some really impressive achievements, like those mountain fortresses they built using steep cliffs, gorges. Shows some serious engineering skill.
Okay, let's dig into that prehistoric stuff a bit more. You mentioned Paleolithic hand axes found in South Cholla Province back in the 1920s. That sounds like a big discovery.
It really was. That find kind of kicked off serious Paleolithic studies in Korea and definitely sparked public interest. Before that, maybe not as much focus.
So Korean archaeology and Paleolithic studies sort of started together.
Pretty much, yeah. Though it's true, the Neolithic period often gets more research attention overall. But you really need all three, Paleolithic, Neolithic, Bronze Age, to grasp the deep history here, the sheer time scale of the Paleolithic alone. 500,000 years of people being there. It's huge.
And then the Bronze Age, you mentioned dolmens, hundreds of thousands of them. That number just blows my mind.
It's staggering, isn't it? All across the peninsula. The sheer scale suggests, well, a pretty organized society. Lots of communal effort needed for that. Makes you wonder about their beliefs, their social structure.
Definitely. Hundreds of thousands.
It really is remarkable. And there's still a lot to figure out about what they all meant, the different shapes and sizes. But the Bronze Age also sees advances in pottery. Korea is known for its earthenware, using natural clay.
Ah, interesting. How's that different from, say, Japan?
Well, Japanese pottery often used ground pottery clay. So a subtle difference in technique, but maybe culturally significant.
Okay. And those bronze daggers, the
Yeah,
gold crowns from Silla tombs, maybe Sogdian connections even?
exactly. They're not just shiny objects. They hint at complex societies, trade networks, maybe links reaching far across Eurasia towards the steppe regions.
It's amazing thinking about those early states like Gimhae Silla down south, trading with Japan, China, maybe even the steppes.
And those lesser-known Tungus states up north you mentioned earlier,
Mm.
it paints this picture of a really dynamic, interconnected region, even way back then.
Yeah, laying the groundwork for later connections and, well, later conflicts too, I guess.
Unfortunately, yes. Okay, so let's focus back on the Paleolithic itself, the Old Stone Age. Human presence going back at least 500,000 years.
And the evidence is stone tools.
Primarily, yes. Especially those really early kind of basic flake tools made from quartz pebbles. Lower Paleolithic stuff.
Right.
Pretty rare, but crucial. Think basic chipping for a sharp edge.
Okay, very early tech.
Absolutely. But vital proof of the first inhabitants. Later on, in the late Paleolithic, the tools get more sophisticated, made using percussion technology, striking stones together in controlled ways.
More refined shapes, sharper edges.
Exactly. And these tools tell us about these small bands of hunter-gatherers moving around, adapting, developing their own sort of regional styles.
And we actually have sites, like archaeological proof.
Oh, yeah. Places like Sanhaedong, Yeojadong, Jonggokri in South Korea,
Yeah.
and similar finds up north, too, around Pyongyang. It's not just guesswork. There's real physical evidence of people living there for a very, very long time, and their tool technology evolving.
Okay. Now let's jump forward quite a bit. Neolithic era, New Stone Age. Around 10,000 years ago, you said big changes happened then, driven by climate.
Yeah, huge shifts. The glaciers retreated, rainfall increased, forests changed, more broadleaf trees spreading.
So the whole environment transformed. How did people cope?
Well, the big animals they used to hunt, the Ice Age megafauna, they started disappearing. So people had to find new food sources. A major adaptation in Korea was wet rice agriculture, starting around 6,000 years ago. That was massive for population growth, for settling down.
Ah, rice farming. But it wasn't just farming, right?
No, not at all. People developed a much wider range of subsistence strategies. Marine fishing became important, even whaling using quite sophisticated harpoons and things, and craft production using clay, bamboo, whatever was available.
So diversifying. And this led to different cultures in different regions.
Exactly. People became more settled, less nomadic. They relied on a wider mix of resources, and you start seeing distinct regional variations in their way of life. It's a major turning point.
From nomadic hunters to settled communities.
That's the Neolithic shift. We see permanent settlements, maybe longhouses or circular huts, places to process food, and a real boom in making tools from stone, antler, bone. Plus that distinctive pottery.
And burials. You mentioned dolmens again.
Yes, different burial practices emerge too. Long stone coffin burials and, of course, those incredible dolmens become much more prominent later in the Neolithic and especially the Bronze Age. We also see signs of specialized crafts, maybe ritual activities. It's all laying the foundation for more complex societies later on.
Okay, so we've gone from basic stone flakes to settled farming communities. That definitely sets the stage for what comes next. The Three Kingdoms period. Around the early 3rd century AD.
Yes, that's when the peninsula really divides geographically into Goguryeo in the north, Baekje in the southwest, and Silla in the southeast. It's a crucial turning point. Lots of intense struggles for land, for power.
And this happens after the Han Dynasty in China weakens. So a power vacuum?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely changed the dynamics. The northern parts and southern parts of the peninsula started developing quite differently after that.
So up north, Goguryeo, with China less of a direct force, did they just expand?
Well, Goguryeo was already rising, but yes, they embarked on significant political and military reforms. This helped them expand rapidly into Manchuria and down into the peninsula. Powerful, but maybe stretching themselves thin, too.
Okay. And down south, Baekje and Silla, a different story. More migrations, maybe.
It seems like it. Various groups migrating, existing tribes coming together. That led to Baekje and Silla forming. Initially, power was often more spread out, local chiefs holding a lot of sway.
So not instantly centralized kingdoms.
No, that came later. And you start seeing distinct regional identities showing up in things like burials, pottery, before the royal power really consolidated.
Let's zoom in on each one then. Goguryeo in the north, founded by Jumong, claiming descent from a god.
Yeah, Jumong tracing lineage back to the heavenly god Huanan. Pretty standard legendary founding story. They really took off around the 4th century under King Goguryeo the Great. Became the dominant power in Northeast Asia, huge territory. Shows their military strength, their strategic position.
Wow, a massive kingdom. And organized, too. You mentioned administration.
Oh, yes. They needed it to manage that vast area. Developed a sophisticated system, government districts, bureaucracy, their capital, Goryeo, and its fortifications. That's a UNESCO World Heritage Site now. Tells you something about their level of civilization.
But they eventually fell, despite being so powerful.
Yeah, internal conflicts played a part, but the killer blow was an alliance between their rival Silla and the powerful Tang Dynasty of China. But their initial dominance is key to understanding that whole era.
Okay. Then there's Baekje, Southwest, poetic name interpretations, white land, blossoming wildflowers. Sounds different from warrior Goguryeo.
It does suggest a different cultural feel, maybe. Founded near the Cheongshan River on the west coast, an area known for mulberry trees.
Mulberry trees. Interesting. Why is that significant?
Well, mulberry trees are essential for raising silkworms, so sericulture silk production likely flourished, and papermaking too, which needs mulberry bark, both vital for their economy and culture.
Ah, silk and paper. And they were seafaring, known for textiles.
Very much so. Developed a strong maritime culture, famous for beautiful flower-patterned textiles, advanced weaving, dyeing, amazing examples found in royal tombs, real artistry.
So the mulberry trees influenced their economy, even helped preserve knowledge through paper.
Seems likely, yes. And Baekje became a major conduit, transmitting Chinese culture, Buddhism, Confucianism, technology over to Japan. They even sent weavers to Japan when the empress asked. A huge cultural influence.
A cultural bridge, definitely. Okay, last of the big three, Silla. Southeast, more isolated at first.
Yeah, founded in what's now North Gyeongsang province. Geographically a bit more contained initially. Started out quite decentralized, ruled by different clans, the Saro.
But they weren't totally cut off. Maritime trade early on.
Interestingly, yes. Early on, they seemed involved in trade in the Han River Basin. Might have even had contact with people from Wa, which is ancient Japan, early sea links.
So all three had distinct locations, distinct early influences. Were there differences within Silla as it grew?
Archaeology suggests so. For example, the southern part was good for horse raising, and some horse gear found there looks similar to Japanese styles from the same time. Hints at connections.
Interesting. But they eventually shifted inland, became more unified.
Over time, yes. Focused more on inland integration, adopted advanced metallurgy, steel, bronze. That suggests growing social hierarchy, specialized labor. Silla eventually became this federation, bringing different tribal groups together under more central control.
Okay, so these three distinct kingdoms, always competing, but then eventually unified Silla emerges. How did that happen? Silla just won.
Not quite that simple. Silla made a very smart strategic alliance with Tang China. Together they defeated Baekje first, then Goguryeo, around 668 AD. That unified most of the peninsula under Silla rule.
And that kicked off a golden age.
Yes, a period of relative peace, cultural boom. The capital moved to Gyeongju, Seoul became a major trading nation plugged into Tang networks. Lots of cultural exchange.
What kind of cultural flourishing? Art, architecture?
Definitely. We see new styles of Buddhist art, temples. They took inspiration from India via China, but Korean artisans adapted it, created their own distinct look. Elegant lines, harmony with nature. These styles continued to develop later, in the Goryeo period too. Think of magnificent temples like Bulguksa.
Bulguksa, right. Famous temple. Okay, so after unified Silla, the Goryeo Dynasty takes over. Another upheaval. Or a smoother transition.
It followed a period where Silla weakened, became unstable. Goryeo was founded in 918 by Wang Geon, a general with Goguryeo roots. His power base was originally one of the Han tribes. He gradually expanded, took over key farming areas.
Wang Geon, was he known for anything specific?
He's remembered relatively positively. Valued learning, justice, used benevolent policies, apparently. His successors finished unifying the remaining tribal groups around 935, a new era.
So from warring kingdoms to unified Silla, then Goryeo. A clear, if sometimes bumpy, path towards a unified Korean state. Now, going back to the three kingdoms, you mentioned cultural achievements beyond just politics. Music, for instance.
Oh, yeah. That era saw a real flowering of Korean culture, despite the divisions.
Yeah.
Lots of exchange with China, sending musician emissaries, bringing back ideas. But crucially, uniquely Korean instruments started appearing then. A desire for their own sound.
Like the kamungo and kayagum. Those are really iconic.
Exactly. The kamungo, a six-string zither, is traditionally linked to a Goguryeo prime minister. And the kayagum, the 12-string zither, developed in the Gaya region and was then adopted by Silla.
Are there cool stories about how they were invented?
Oh, definitely. Legends always add color, right? The Kamungo is said to come from this special mulberry tree with magical sound. And the Kayagam, a king of Gaia, supposedly wanted music that was purely Korean, not just copying China. One musician was supposedly so good he could charm animals with his playing.
Huh, love that. So music was clearly important in the courts back then.
Very much so. Apparently, the Sui dynasty in China was really impressed by the Goguryeo Kamungo sound. And we have those amazing tomb murals from Goguryeo. They show instruments, performers, give us a real glimpse into their arts and daily life. Later, Goryeo had sophisticated court music, even adapting old Silla tunes.
A really rich musical tradition growing there. What about religion? We mentioned Buddhism and unified Silla. How big a role did it play overall in these early periods?
Huge. Buddhism arrived from China, starting around the 4th century. And it was embraced really enthusiastically by rulers, by ordinary people. It became the main religion for over 500 years, right through Goryeo.
So temple building, Buddhist art, all that flourished.
Absolutely. Beautiful temples, often in stunning mountain locations. Incredible art. Royalty and the elite were big patrons.
Was it just about personal faith or more than that?
Much more. It provided a sort of unifying framework, philosophically, spiritually. During Goryeo, there was even this strong belief that Buddhist spirit helped them resist the Mongol invasions.
Wow. Really? Like spiritual defense?
That was the belief. They even carved the Tripitaka Karyana, those tens of thousands of wood blocks, with Buddhist scriptures, partly as an act to invoke divine protection. Even when Buddhism faced some criticism later in Goryeo, its underlying influence remained really strong. People kept studying and printing Buddhist texts.
Okay, fascinating. So we've covered prehistory, the Three Kingdoms, unified Silla, Goryeo. Next is the Joseon Dynasty, a really long one, 1392 to 1897. How did that start? Big break from Goryeo.
It was definitely a major shift. Founded by General Yi Seong-gai, he became King Tayo. It followed a pretty chaotic end to the Goryeo dynasty, which was weakened by internal problems and Mongol influence. Tayo made a decisive move, adopted Neo-Confucianism as the state ideology.
Neo-Confucianism, that's a big change from Buddhism being dominant, right? What did that mean for society?
Huge change. It led to the rise of the Yangban, this class of scholar officials. Power was supposed to be based on education and merit, following Confucian principles, benevolence, righteousness, wisdom, loyalty, all that. Social hierarchy, filial piety became central.
So Chinese Confucian ideas became deeply embedded.
Immensely influential. It shaped everything during Joseon law, government, education, family life, art. Really profound impact.
And this dynasty lasted centuries. Did it have high points and low points?
Oh, absolutely. Early Joseon, especially under rulers like King Sejong the Great, was a time of great progress. Sejong famously oversaw the creation of Hangul, the Korean alphabet.
Right, Hangul. That must have boosted literacy massively.
Dramatically. There were also advances in science, agriculture, law, but later centuries saw problems creep in factional fighting among officials, corruption, peasant unrest. Plus, growing pressure from outside powers, especially Japan, which eventually led to, well, colonization in 1910.
Before we get to that difficult period, back to culture, you mentioned achievements during the Three Kingdoms. What about later examples, like Pulguksa Temple?
Right. Pulguksa started under Silla as a great example. It shows that blend of imported ideas, Buddhist architecture from China, adapted into something uniquely Korean, beautifully integrated with the landscape. It's a World Heritage Site now. Each kingdom contributed its own artistic flavor, even while they were often fighting. Baekje pagodas, for instance, have a very distinct, elegant style that influenced Japan, too.
And isn't there some story associated with Pulguksa? A statue, maybe? Something about sorrowful beauty.
Ah, you might be thinking of the Seokram Grotto nearby, which houses this incredibly serene Buddha statue. There are also legends tied to Pulguksa's construction itself, often involving stories of devotion, maybe tragedy. These tales really show how deeply connected people feel to these historical places.
Okay, so from the long Joseon dynasty, we transition into the 1900s, the colonial era under Japan, a really tough period. It sounds like Korea got caught in the middle of bigger power plays.
That's exactly right. Japan's power grew rapidly after winning wars against China and then Russia around the turn of the century. They steadily increased control over Korea Protectorate in 1905, then full annexation, making it a colony in 1910. Earlier treaties had already chipped away at Korean sovereignty.
And the occupation itself, 1910 to 1945, it was aimed at basically erasing Korean identity.
It was a systematic and often brutal attempt. The goal was assimilation. They banned the Korean language in schools, forced people to take Japanese names, suppressed Korean culture, history.
Just off.
It was. Plus, forced labor, economic exploitation, harsh punishment for any dissent. Japanese settlers were favored in everything. A really dark time.
But people resisted, despite the oppression.
Absolutely. Resistance took many forms. Sadly, some Koreans did collaborate, for different reasons. But there were strong nationalist movements, some inspired by anarchism or communism too, and then there were mass protests. The March 1st movement in 1919 is incredibly important.
March 1st, 1919. Tell me more about that.
People from all walks of life, all across Korea, came out peacefully demanding independence. It was met with extreme violence by the Japanese military police. Thousands were killed or arrested.
So tragic. But it must have been a powerful symbol.
Hugely powerful. Despite the brutal crackdown, it showed the depth of Korean desire for freedom, united the nation in spirit. It led to the formation of the Provisional Government of the Republic of Korea, operating in exile. And Koreans abroad were vital too, organizing support. There was also armed resistance, particularly in Manchuria.
So a period of deep trauma, but also resistance and the forging of a stronger national identity, maybe, setting the stage for what came after WWII.
Exactly. The end of Japanese rule didn't mean peace, unfortunately. It led directly to the division of the peninsula and then the Korean War.
Right. The war, 1950 to 1953, a direct result of the end of WWII and the start of the Cold War.
Pretty much. Korea became a pawn in that larger struggle. Remember, after Japan's defeat in 1945, the U.S. and the Soviet Union agreed to temporarily divide Korea at the 38th parallel to handle the Japanese surrender. Soviets in the north, U.S. in the south.
Supposedly temporary.
Supposedly. But the Cold War froze that division. Two separate states emerged with totally opposed ideologies. The DPRK in the north, communist, led by Kim Il-sung. The ROK in the south, anti-communist, led by Syngman Rhee.
And you mentioned a U.S. policy in the South called denationalization. What was that?
It's a critical term some use. It refers to how the U.S. military government, while trying to dismantle Japanese colonial structures, sometimes sidelined Korean aspirations for immediate independence and unity. They even sometimes relied on Koreans who had collaborated with the Japanese, which caused a lot of resentment.
Okay, so that complicated things further. What finally sparked the war in 1950? Just the division itself?
The division created massive tension. Both North and South Korea claimed to be the legitimate government of the entire peninsula. Both leaders, Kim Il-sung and Syngman Rhee, wanted unification on their own terms. Ideologies clashed violently. There were constant border clashes along the 38th parallel.
So it was already hot before the invasion.
Very tense. When the U.S. withdrew most of its troops from the South in 1949, Kim Il-sung, likely with Soviet backing, saw an opportunity to unify the country by force.
And then the invasion happened, June 1950. North Korea pushes south.
Yes. The North Korean army swept down, captured Seoul quickly, pushed South Korean and the few U.S. forces back to this small corner around Busan.
The Busan perimeter.
Exactly. Then the UN intervened, heavily backed by the U.S. General MacArthur's landing at Incheon was a brilliant, risky move that completely turned the tide.
Pushed the North Koreans back up.
All the way back, close to the Chinese border, the Yalu River. But that triggered China's entry into the war. Massive numbers of Chinese troops pushed the UN forces back south again. Seoul changed hands multiple times.
Just devastating back and forth.
Absolutely. The war eventually settled into this brutal stalemate, roughly along the original 38th parallel. That's where the armistice was finally signed in 1953. Though who precisely fired the first shot to start the full war is still debated sometimes.
So the war tragically cemented the division, leading to the post-war era, with North and South going down completely different roads. The trauma must have been immense.
Unimaginable. The division after 45 was already heartbreaking, splitting families, communities. The war just amplified that exponentially. Massive destruction, millions of casualties, and anyone seen as collaborating with the Japanese faced harsh treatment.
And the two Koreas established themselves formally amidst this chaos.
The ROK was formally established in the South in 1948, under U.S. influence. The DPRK in the North, under Soviet influence, with Kim Il-sung consolidating power and pushing through radical land reform. The 53 armistice didn't bring peace, just a ceasefire. It locked in the division, setting the stage for their very different development paths, especially South Korea's economic push in the 60s.
And those development models were polar opposites, right?
Completely. North Korea went full Stalinist Soviet model, centralized planning, heavy industry, totalitarian control under Kim Il-sung, lots of Soviet aid and advisors early on, though North Korea also tried to carve out its own path somewhat, balancing Moscow and Beijing later.
And South Korea, after the war's devastation.
Utterly destroyed. The first decade after the war was tough.
Yeah.
Politically unstable, reliant on U.S. aid. The big shift came with Park Chung-hee's military coup in 1961.
Park Chung-hee, the developmental state.
Exactly. He implemented these aggressive 5-year plans. State-led, export-focused industrialization. Moved away from aid dependence. Huge government intervention. Close ties with big business conglomerates, the cables.
It worked, economically speaking, but it was authoritarian.
Very much so. It produced rapid growth, the miracle on the Han River, but at the cost of democracy and human rights for a long time. A controversial model, but undeniably transformative for the South Korean economy.
So by the late 40s, early 50s, these two Koreas were set. Different ideologies, different paths, leading to the vastly different places we see today.
Precisely. South Korea's economic story is just stunning. From ruins to, the 10th largest economy globally?
Incredible transformation, GDP growth, exports booming, a middle class emerging, joining the OECD.
Yeah, the government-business relationship, the cabals played a huge part. Academics still debate exactly how the Korean miracle happened and if it could be copied.
While North Korea, often seen as the enigma, facing huge economic problems.
Generally, yes. Persistent challenges, food shortages, international isolation due to its nuclear program and rhetoric. It often seems both rigid and surprisingly resilient. Constant questions about its future, its leadership.
South Korea's growth becoming one of the four tigers. It's astonishing given where they started in 1961.
Absolutely. From being comparable to poor African nations to a global tech leader by the late 20th century. This Korean-style development, state-led, export-driven, was scrutinized, debated, but undeniably successful in transforming the economy, especially in industries like electronics. Lots of factors involve policy, innovation, global markets.
And politically in North Korea during this time, Kim Il-sung seemed to really cement his power after the war.
Oh, totally. He moved ruthlessly to consolidate control, purged rivals in the party, in the army, established that military-first policy, dealt with pro-Soviet versus pro-Chinese factions in the late 50s by purging those who didn't align perfectly with him. Even before the DPRK was founded, he was maneuvering, sidelining potential threats, created a system of absolute personal loyalty.
And those internal power struggles in the North, they must have impacted the South, too.
Definitely fueled the intense anti-communism and authoritarianism in the South for decades. The fear was palpable.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit. Korea's cultural heritage. It's so rich, draws so much interest globally.
It really does. It's this amazing tapestry woven from centuries of struggles, creativity, resilience. Think traditional dress, the hanbok, the unique music. It has this capacity to absorb influences but remain distinctly Korean. Of course, how you view that heritage can depend on your perspective.
You mentioned traditional music earlier. How did that evolve after the Three Kingdoms?
Well, if we roughly divide history, ancient era, dynasty era, modern era, the foundations were laid early on with those instruments like the komundo, kaegum. During the later dynasties, unified Silla, Goryeo, Joseon, there was continued exchange with China, refining court music, developing orchestras.
Were there other influences, maybe from Japan or elsewhere?
There's some debate about Central Asian or even Japanese influences on some Silla music, yeah. But the drive for a distinct Korean sound, like the kaegum legend suggests, seems constant. Even the Mongol invasions didn't completely erase these traditions.
And what about folk traditions, shamanism?
Crucial. Shamanism predates Buddhism and Confucianism in Korea and has deeply influenced folk music like pungmul, the farmer's music, and shamanic ritual songs. These traditions adapted over time, too, even responding to historical events like the Japanese invasions in the 16th century. They're incredibly resilient.
Finally, let's talk about Korea's place in the world today. Its international relations seem so defined by its location.
Always has been. Right there between China, Russia, Japan. Its history is full of navigating those powerful neighbors. Today, relationships with them, plus the U.S., are absolutely critical for security, for development, especially with the peninsula still divided.
That division creates inherent power imbalances,
They're
right?
huge ones, and complicates everything. The U.S. is key for South Korea's security, interested in peace, maybe inter-Korean economic ties.
Yeah.
But then you have North Korea's nuclear program. Understanding Pyongyang's motives, maybe rooted in Cold War fears, is vital for any diplomacy.
And China's role.
China is essential. North Korea's main partner. Any discussion about unification or denuclearization needs China involved, though their interests might not align with everyone else's. And Korean unification is very different from, say, the Taiwan issue. Respecting sovereignty is key, but keeping the two Koreas so separate in today's world is getting harder and harder.
You mentioned Kim Il-sung navigating factions earlier. Balancing external powers while consolidating internal control seems like a constant theme for the North.
It does. Even in the late 50s, managing pro-Soviet versus pro-Chinese elements, dealing with different views on relations with the U.S., it led to purges as he asserted his independent line, carefully avoiding alienating Moscow or Beijing too much while securing his own power.
And South Korea's global role, it's changed so much, from aid recipient to major player.
Dramatically. It's a big economy, a vibrant democracy, wants more influence. But it's still navigating a world with superpowers. It's sometimes called a middle power, but faces huge security challenges. This paradoxical nature, trusted partner but still constrained, facing dilemmas from potential U.S.-China rivalry.
What kind of dilemmas?
Well, the big one is being caught between major power competition. The worst-case scenario, thinkers worry about everything from actual conflict to some kind of grand bargain between the U.S. and China that might reshape the region in ways unfavorable to Korea. It's a complex position.
So bringing this deep dive to a close, what an epic story. Millennia of history, resilience, adaptation, the constant shadow of external powers.
From prehistory, the Three Kingdoms, unification, foreign influence, the trauma of colonialism, war, right up to today's division and the starkly different paths of North and South. It's a history that's still very much alive.
Absolutely. And that leads us to a final thought for you, our listener. Thinking about this incredibly long history, navigating powerful neighbors, overcoming immense challenges, what do you think are the most significant factors that will shape Korea's future, unified or divided, especially in our complex global landscape today?
What lessons from that rich, often painful past offer clues about the paths ahead? Something to ponder.
Thank you for joining us on this deep historical exploration.